I just want to welcome everybody. Good evening. I'm Suzanne Palmieri with ASU Sweetie Center for Sustainable Food Systems. And I'm so excited that we all can be together tonight. It'll be my honor to introduce the panel on behalf of the ASU Sweetie Center for Sustainable Food Systems and Slow Food Phoenix. I am lucky to have roles with both of these organizations, and both of whom are working in their own ways to transform our food system. We will have question and answer kind of throughout the discussion, so please put them in the Q&A box or in the chat, and we will work to answer those. And we want to get started quickly so we can just have a little bit of conversation with our panelists and then get right to questions. And I'm going to first introduce Melissa Nelson. She is recently joined the ASU School of Sustainability. We're so excited to have her with us. She joined the faculty in August. She is an Indigenous ecologist, writer, editor, media maker, and scholar activist. Before joining the School of Sustainability, she served as professor of the American Indian Studies at San Francisco State University for 18 years. She is a transdisciplinary and community-based scholar dedicated to Indigenous rights and sustainability. Through the Cultural Conservancy, she has co-created and managed an Indigenous farm in Northern California over the past 8 years. Melissa is also active for Indigenous people's rights and sustainable lifeways in higher education, nonprofits, and philanthropy, and is passionate about Indigenous food sovereignty at local, regional, and global levels. So Melissa, I'm just hoping you can share with us thoughts about the film, your work, and please don't leave out the Slow Food Turtle Island Association.
All right, thank you so much for this opportunity. Great to see you all. Chimigwich, Bujunin Dinoi Meganatug. I want to greet you all in my Anishinaabe language. Thanks for joining us. I really loved watching the film Gather tonight. It was so moving and so touching, and it just speaks to the power of the Indigenous food revolution that is happening at local, regional, national, and international levels. And so one of the ways I do this work is through the Slow Food Turtle Island Association. We are a grassroots network of Native American food producers, farmers, gatherers, activists, chefs, educators, all kinds of different folks in the US and Canada. We were formed 5 years ago in 2015 at the request of the great Winona LaDuke from the White Earth Land Recovery Project. And Winona's work with wild rice, sacred manomen, has been a model for the kind of work that can be done for tribal communities to restore our sacred foods for both nutrition and spiritual and cultural reasons, as well as bring it to market, her work with Native Harvest. So her and I and many other folks have been involved with the slow food movement since about 2002, 2004, really trying to help indigenize the space and to utilize the space for advocating for food sovereignty. So after attending many of the international gatherings in Italy and then Slow Food Nation in Denver, we also hosted a Slow Food Nation here in San Francisco with the Native American Pavilion in 2008. Many Native folks have been loosely organized and trading and doing our own work on the ground. And Winona said, why don't we really formalize this network and use the slow food, model of networks to do this work? So we organized, and we're really a collection of Native organizations such as Winona's White Earth Land Recovery Project and Honor the Earth. The Taos Food Center out of Taos, New Mexico has been very, very active. The work of Terry Badhand and Patty Martinson, the new Native American Food Sovereignty Alliance Group, and the wonderful seed keeper Rowan White through the Indigenous Seed Keepers Network. So we've been doing everything from seed keeping to advocating for chefs, to make spaces for chefs to teach about their work, such that we saw with Nephi Craig in the wonderful film about the power of supporting Native chefs to have space to prepare their foods, gather their foods, teach about the traditional foods, and just have some time to bring people together to honor these sacred foods in a contemporary way. So the Native Chefs movement has been a big part of it. Also, the Traditional Native American Farmers Association, a wonderful group that's been going on for decades, with Clayton Brascoupé, who's a Mohawk farmer, has been a great leader in this work, and really bridging local foodways, whether it's in Taos, New Mexico, or Tempe, Arizona, or urban groups like in San Francisco with urban Indian intertribal groups, really linking these local projects to regional networks for trade so that we can have monomen and dried salmon from the Yurok people, so that we can really activate those old trade networks to again diversify our native food cuisine. And then bring those to the global scene, to the global indigenous food sovereignty movement through Slow Food International. That has been a wonderful forum, a great place for us to highlight some of the struggles of our food issues with access and genetic modification, environmental impacts, and the great opportunity for us to really restore these foods again in a contemporary way. So there's also a health influence, obviously, that returning to these native foods has so much power to restore our health and well-being at the individual level, at the community level, at the tribal level, and certainly at the ecological level, to really enact sustainability. So Slow Food Turtle Island Association is a wonderful network of networks with many different native food producers and allies. And we're continuing to grow it, but we're challenged because we all have multiple jobs, and many of us have our own nonprofits and our own farms that we manage. So we do need some support to really move it to the next level. And I know Slow Food right now is also reinventing itself and nominating more Indigenous peoples onto their leadership teams, which is very exciting. But we do need more support for this kind of organizing and networking at these larger scale levels. So there's much more to say, but that's a little bit about that movement. And I think the film really demonstrated the beauty of bringing back traditional hunting, traditional fishing. So that's a big part of it as well, traditional gathering, not just farming, and also the great buffalo restoration that's happening right now across Turtle Island. It's very exciting. So those are just a few bright lights and examples of the work that's coming back. And if I may, one more positive example that just happened is that the governor of California and Oregon signed a new agreement to fast track the removal of the dams on the Klamath River to restore the salmon and restore the Yurok and Hupa and Klamath people's traditional relationship with their sacred food salmon and all the life of that river. So that just happened a couple of days ago, and that's a wonderful victory to celebrate. Thank you so much for listening and for this opportunity. I hope you all enjoyed the film. Miigwech.
All right, thanks so much, Melissa. I'm going to quickly move on just because I want to get to questions, and I wanted to introduce our next two panelists. So first, I'm going to turn it over to Kathleen. Kathleen is my colleague and friend. She's the executive director at the Swedish Center and a professor of practice at the School of Sustainability. She came to ASU after a stint with the George Washington University, where she directed the university's sustainability efforts and started the GW Food Institute. Prior to that, Kathleen was the Deputy Secretary of the Department of Agriculture under the Obama-Biden administration, and from that position led efforts on local and regional food systems. She helped with the First Lady's Let's Move initiative, as well as overseeing the operation of the department, which is a $150 billion operation. So Kathleen, we've been working together on some matters related to elevating Native voices as we work to transform food systems. Can you just share some of your thoughts about this work, and then also share it in sort of a global context because of your work with FAO? You're on mute.
Well, good, because I said silly stuff. Okay, it's great to be here. It's such a beautiful film. Oh, and so much of it takes place in Arizona, where I live now. And I saw people in the film that I know and respect. So great to have this panel. And thanks to Slow Food Phoenix for partnering with the Sweetie Center on this. Thanks to Lauren Kuby for always being the greatest event hostess, I suppose. Thank you for doing this, everybody. So I want to first give a big shout out to Elise Dubray. Man, I love that young woman in the science fair. And that's really what I want to talk about after seeing this film. We had a really great event in January this year. The Sweetie Center partnered with the University of Hawaii, and we had a function on the wisdom of Indigenous foodways. And in setting that up, I said to people, I want to talk about poverty on reservations, which is very, very real. Incidence of diabetes, very, very real. But I want to talk about what works really well and the incredible knowledge and intelligence and what can we learn from Indigenous foodways. And it was quite an event that actually ended with catering that among other chefs in the process of doing that was Twyla Cazador, who you saw very prominently featured in this film. So shout out to Twyla, that was great. I learned a lot. And I think what's really in my head, and this is also true for all kinds of institutions and including FAO, is how do we rethink science in a way that appreciates and learns from Indigenous knowledge. So this is, I just can't help it. I love this book. Melissa, you have no doubt have read it before. You too, maybe everyone's read it, but it's Braiding Sweet, oh, you can't see it, Braiding Sweetgrass. It's really wonderful. Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teachings of Plants. 2013, Robin Wall Kimmerer. I don't know if I say it perfectly. I'm going to give a little read of a passage because I love, love, love this book. I dream of a world guided by a lens of stories rooted in the revelations of science and framed with an Indigenous worldview. Stories in which matter and spirit are both given voice. Scientists are particularly good at learning about the lives of other species. The stories they could tell convey the intrinsic values of the lives of other beings, lives every bit as interesting, maybe more so, as those of Homo sapiens. But while scientists are among those who are privy to these other intelligences, many seem to believe that the intelligence they access is only their own. They lack the fundamental ingredient, humility. After the gods experimented with arrogance, they gave the people of corn humility, and it takes humility to learn from other species. It goes on and on. I just love this book. Many Indigenous peoples share the understanding that we each are endowed with a particular gift, a unique ability, birds to sing and stars to glitter, for instance. It is understood that those gifts have a dual nature, though a gift is also a responsibility. If the bird's gift is song, then it has a responsibility to greet the day with music. It is the duty of birds to sing, and the rest of us receive the song as a gift. Asking what is our responsibility is perhaps also to ask, what is our gift and how shall we use it? So to me, I find it particularly important being at Arizona State University, right down the road from Navajo Nation, Hopi. We're on native lands. We have so many tribes. We have 22 maybe federally recognized tribes in the state. And that's just one way of thinking about tribes, by the way. There's so much wisdom that's untapped. And I'm just really excited about working at the Sweetie Center and thinking about how we can put on our thinking caps a little bit differently to appreciate all that's out there to learn and to figure out what our responsibilities are with all that knowledge. So anyhow, I'm on a ramble. It's been a long day. I started my morning at 5 a.m. with calls on forestry with people across the world, but I I'm really excited to hear the questions, and I will pass it on.
Okay, then I'm going to introduce our last panelist. And this is my fellow board member with on Slow Food Phoenix, Cristal, Franco. And Cristal is also a student at ASU and earning her master's degree. Her research focuses on Indian food systems, and she's co-teaching an Indian food sovereignty class. She's also just joined AHO the Center for Sustainable Agriculture. And we're hoping to hear more from you, since we've heard some of these other panelists talk more about domestic and international work, kind of what's going on right here in Arizona. I think you know many of the producers and have been working with them now, so it'll be great to hear that.
Okay, so I'm gonna start by just sharing my story out here in Ajo and branching out from there. I work for the Ajo Center for Sustainable Agriculture, and we are a nonprofit organization and a social enterprise. With COVID-19, all programming ceased, and the nonprofit jumped straight into emergency food relief. In Ajo, Arizona, where I work and live now, Ajo's a border town near the Tohono O'odham Nation. We're about 10 miles from the western border of the reservation, and that means we are about 2 hours south from Phoenix and 2 hours west from Tucson in the middle of the Sonoran Desert. There are 2 grocery stores out here. One small Bashas', 60 miles away in Cells on the O'odham Nation, and one small local grocery store here in Ajo. So when our grocery stores ran out of food at the beginning of the pandemic, it meant at least an 80-mile drive to the next closest grocery store. 2 of the programs of Ajo CSA are a farm and a farm-to-table restaurant. So initially we sold farm boxes, but as the grocery stores ran out of more and more food, our director had the ability to purchase bulk amounts of food from the restaurant supply chain and have access to food in a way grocery stores didn't. Because we're a licensed commercial kitchen, we've been repackaging this bulk food and distributing it out to the population of Ajo, the surrounding rural areas, and to the O'odham Nation. As the pandemic continued, we've partnered with the Community Food Bank of Southern Arizona as well. Like everyone else, we're now needing to accept and adjust to a new normal, and we're revisioning what our programming looks like as a rural American Indian and food system nonprofit and social enterprise. So that brings me to the current situation with working with American Indian producers, at least here in Southern Arizona. Tourism is a leading economic industry here in Arizona, and in particular to our American Indian communities. Part of what we are experiencing is that our producers and craftspeople are hurting from the drop in travelers who came onto the reservations for sightseeing, for tours, for the adventure activities, learning about our culture, eating at our restaurants, and even purchasing hunting licenses. So as those of us living in Arizona may be aware of, the various American Indian nations like Navajo Nation and the O'odham Nation outright had to close the borders because the spread of COVID-19 had gotten so bad within the reservation communities. So how do you have a farmer's market under those circumstances? You don't, has been one of the answers. And that is one of the places where we are building from. How or even do we reopen our farmers and crafts markets? And for the past several weeks, we've been having at least weekly meetings on this in our region. An additional complication to the pandemic situation has been the drought. Another part of the American Indian food system story of 2020 here in Arizona is that for those without irrigation and who do dryland farming, which is our traditional way of farming, there just hasn't been enough rain in this past season to produce a seasonal harvest to even sell if there had been a farmer's market. So what are we doing, and what are some of our conversations like? One growth opportunity is expanding, or for some of us, just beginning our online presence. Aho CSA, where I work, has just launched an online store to sell locally grown and wild harvested indigenous food products. In collaboration with our regional American Indian Food and Farm Working Group, we are in the process of holding both an in-person and online open air and safety and forest holiday market and cells on the Autumn Nation, and seeing how our first reopened market goes. A few months ago, Slow Food Phoenix asked me how can they assess the food system work of American Indians here in Arizona. And just as a beginning piece, I would say that it requires relationship to even begin that conversation. Relationship is a process and built slowly over time, especially with Indigenous peoples. And as you watched in the film, part of our stories are layers of historical trauma, and we tend to be insular for good reason. You all got a piece of that by watching this film, so I'm not going to go down that road. But for an immediate answer, I will say that I'm working with Slow Food Phoenix to create a resource page that links to American Indian food producers, businesses, and our various social media outlets. If you cannot come to us because of the COVID-19 restrictions, then please purchase from our producers and craftspeople online. And please follow our stories on social media to get to know us. I had this much time to even begin to share our stories. And I will wrap up by saying two things. First, thank you to our parents, our elders, and our community members who passed their Foodways knowledge to us to be able to continue this work. And second, I'd like to actually flip my laptop around because I'm in our store and cafe, and you can see our Indigenous products behind us. But when I flip the laptop around, you can see what our building actually looks like. These are the food relief bags that we work on to distribute rurally and onto the Autumn Nation. So thank you.
Thank you, Cristal. And I did put the link for the Aho Farmers Market into the chat, so I hope everybody can find it. All right, so we're going to turn to the Q&A portion, and Kathleen, I'm going to let you do the moderating for the question and answer, if you don't mind. So Lauren, I guess you can pass the questions to Kathleen now. Thanks.
While I'm waiting to pull up a question, I will say that I have been to the Aho Market and I have purchased some very nice wedding gifts there. So I encourage everybody to go shopping. It's an incredible organization. We all should be supportive of it. All right, who's got a question for me? I'm ready to offer up a question for our panelists.
Kathleen, it's
All right.
Lauren. Thank you. A question through the chat.
Okay. So in the meantime, I'm going to get to ask a question, which is always wonderful. Cristal, what part of the movie was the part that really grabbed your heart the most? And that's really unfair, I know, to ask that kind of question because it was all so moving. But was there something that really, like I said, I was all about that science fair. I mean, I love the whole movie, but that really caught me. Is there something that really captured your heart, and why?
It was hearing more of Twyla's story. I first met her a couple of years ago at the American Indian conference that happens, that flips between ASU and I believe the University of New Mexico. She came to share her story and about how she began learning more about her traditional foodways. And she shared the part about the sexual trauma, and I thought, wow, I could just never be that bold speaking about my own trauma. And then not long after hearing Twyla's story, I went back home to visit one of my aunts, and she was saying how my father died in shame. He was so ashamed of his past and of who he was and growing up on San Carlos, and being that much in poverty and being surrounded by the drugs and being just a lifelong cocaine addict and meth addict himself. And I had realized as much as I was trying to turn my own life around, I was living in shame of my own past and who I was and who I am, and being ashamed of my childhood and the roots that I came from and my own historical trauma journey. And so watching that again, I just thank you, Twyla, for helping me address my own trauma and healing and becoming a better person for the next generation.
Oh, Cristal, thank you so much for being so brave and sharing that with us and being brave like Twyla, brave and strong. The stories of resilience are important for us all to hear. And I'm sorry to hear that about your dad. Melissa, I'm going to turn to you and ask you the same question. Was there something that particularly captured your heart in this film? I know it's like choosing between children, but you know.
Yes, or choosing between, tepary beans or pinto beans or white corn or sweet corn. Yeah, there were so many powerful stories. And like you, I think, the young Dubray woman and her relationship with buffalo, being a Plains Chippewa person of the Northern Plains, North Dakota, Manitoba, and the love of the buffalo and how she was able to embrace it and combine her traditional knowledge with her love of science, Western science, and combine those in such a beautiful way and with such pride in her culture and relationship to that beautiful land and that beautiful animal. That was very moving to me. And that was powerful. And likewise, the courage of Twyla. I was a little surprised and also just like moved by how the film did not shy away at all from the profound traumas that colonization and attempted genocide and some genocide has had on our communities. And you spoke about that so beautifully, Cristal. And I've seen lots of footage of boarding schools, my mom's stories of boarding school, my relatives' stories of boarding school, but I'd never seen actual footage. They had a lot of historical archival footage of the boarding schools, and some of those scenes literally just broke my heart. I just broke down on a few of those. And then the amazing resilience of those young Yurok men fishing on the boats and relearning the traditions of their ancestors was so much humor and curiosity and joyfulness, and traveling internationally to the Amazon and seeing the struggles of other Indigenous peoples. I just thought the whole thing was powerful. So the youth and their power to heal themselves and their communities through food was just so inspiring.
You didn't just pick one.
No, sorry.
I know, I'm only teasing you. I mean, it's just so beautiful. All right.
It's too good.
It's too good. All right, I've got a few questions that have come in. The first one is, one of the big elements of slow food has been setting up Presidia here in Arizona. There is the Navajo Churro Presidium. However, in general, Presidia have not picked up in the USA or with San Francisco Turtle Island. In the rest of the world, the organizational structure, it's a long one, of Presidia have really enabled communities of traditional foods to have more of a powerful collective. I wonder from Melissa's perspective why Presidia are not as prevalent, and do you think the Turtle Island or Indigenous Terra Madre believes in different forms of organizing around specific traditional foods?
All right, that's a complex one. Thank you, Sarah, for the tough one. Well, real quickly, it all comes down to Indigenous rights and Indigenous self-determination. When the Ojibwe folks, the White Earth Ojibwe around Winona Leduc said, we need to protect our wild rice. University of Minnesota researchers are trying to genetically modify our wild rice. California agribusiness is trying to co-opt our wild rice and sell it to market, and it's not wild rice. So they galvanized around wild rice and used the slow food Presidia and the Arc of Taste as really fundamental tools to protect their rice, our sacred rice, and to advocate for it and to educate people about it. So it was a very positive example. Likewise, the Navajo with folks like Roy Cady and Areta Begay, who really wanted to protect their Navajo churro sheep, and they brought the project to Slow Food to use the Arc of Taste and the Presidia. They go together. The Arc of Taste is like an endangered species list of native foods of the Americas. And so once it's on that list, it gets support and education and critical habitat almost and funding. And then the Presidia is like the protection around it. And so when grassroots communities want to protect one of their foods and use it, it's very, very helpful. The problem has been when well-meaning non-native folks have wanted to nominate these foods. A really perfect example with the local Otham. Someone, a non-native, nominated the tepary bean onto the Arc of Taste without checking with the tribe and without checking with TOCA, Tohono O'odham Community Action, who had been advocating for the protection of their tepary beans for so long, Terrell Johnson and others. So that's when people became suspect. Also, some other Vermont folks wanted to put maple syrup on the Arc of Taste and a Presidia, but they didn't consult with the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe. That is our traditional food and medicine, and we have long traditions and stories about it. And once you put something on the Arc of Taste, it gets highlighted, and then everyone wants to go eat it and harvest it and take it. And some of these foods are very rare and very unique and can't just be over harvested. And so a lot of tribes have not wanted to follow with the example of Monoman wild rice or churro sheep, because there's a concern that they will be over harvested or misused. So it's kind of like an appropriation question. So again, it comes down to self-determination, and Slow Food USA and Slow Food International are really grappling with this. And of course, trying to create these Indigenous, bodies to kind of oversee this. But again, we all have 5 jobs and are farmers and family people, and, we need some resources to be able to have some kind of oversight to review when people nominate these foods. Because right now, anyone can nominate a food. Likewise, folks have nominated acorns here from California, very important food and also very endangered because of sudden oak death and overuse. So it comes down to ethics, and it comes down to having an oversight committee, and also knowing how complex and diverse our Native communities are, and that some may want to use this tool and others may not. So in general, people have not been using that tool as much as they could have.
Great, thank you. I have a question for you, Cristal, and that is there seed saving happening at Aho? Is that a skill that's being taught? Is there a seed library? How are food sovereignty and food apartheid being addressed? Well, that was a big package of questions. You can take with what you want from that.
Okay, so something that's unique here in Pima County is that our entire library system, every library has a seed library in it. And that's because of the work of Bill McDorman. And if everyone got that email today, he just stepped down as executive director of Rocky Mountain Seed Alliance. But one of his students took his seed saving course, and she was a librarian, and she still is, for the Pima County library system. And so she, had a team meeting with them and brought to them this idea of a seed library, and they said, we want it in every library. So she got that in every library here in Pima County. And so the library is actually right across the street from our building. So it's like a great location. We can send people there to get more seeds. And then our nonprofit also developed an Aho Gardeners Network. And through that, we do distribute free seeds and free seedlings. And we also receive seeds from the Community Food Bank of Southern Arizona. And then as far as, the bigger questions, that's part of what we do here at Ajo CSA is helping to develop the local food system. Nina's been here at least 12 years. And her work with Sterling Johnson and what was TOCA and what has now transitioned into Ajo CSA is a continuation of strengthening, re-strengthening the O'odham food system and then developing it rurally off the reservation.
By the way, I saw a little fan in the chat box saying, love the marketplace, go shop, gang. I'm a good promoter, right? All right, so here's a question that I think I would like to hear both Cristal and Melissa, and I'm actually going to ask you, Lauren. I know you're just feeding me the questions, but I want to ask you this one too, because it's really your world. And that is, people out there are very moved by the film and very moved by issues of food sovereignty. And many of the people listening likely live in Arizona. They just want to know how to move forward. What's an action item out of seeing this, right? What can we do? How should we engage in a meaningful way on these issues? So I'll start with you, Melissa.
Thank you. Oh boy, so many ways, right? I mean, go shop at the Ajo CSA, right? For all your Christmas shopping, and find local farms. There's so many local farms in the Phoenix area, tribal enterprises, tribal businesses. Absolutely purchase from these areas is incredibly important, and learn more about these issues from, where does your water come from? Where does your food come from? We have so much power as consumers with our purchasing choices to influence our foods and to, demand labeling. They've been, experimenting on us for a while with genetically modified foods, and to really learn more about some of those challenges to the food system. And in terms of learning more about what the tribes are doing with their tribal initiatives, there's so many strong, incredible tribes and coalitions in Arizona. The intertribal group that's been working to protect bears' ears in the Colorado Plateau area in the north, and protect the water of the Colorado River from contamination and cleaning that up. So you can get involved with water restoration, air restoration, soil health, seed saving, and supporting the sovereignty of the local tribes. So, and there's a lot of grassroots NGOs as well that always need volunteers. They always need support. Maybe you have finances, or you have old computers, or you have some skills to contribute. All these small Native NGOs could definitely use some good allyship and support and investment. Maybe you're involved with philanthropy and foundation world, and to help bring resources back to these communities. So there's many different ways to contribute.
Put myself on mute. Lauren, how about you? You're for the School of Sustainability, now Global Futures, one of our key engagement people. What are your thoughts? Probably some of these people are students listening to this film, among others.
Yeah, I would say subscribe to our events at sustainability.asu.edu/events. I'll put that in the chat. But also in embracing local food movements, Sing Meadows is a gem, a treasure in Tempe, and it's located just to the west of Big Surf. So you go north on McClintock and then west on Curry. Excuse me, I think it's Curry. In any case, wonderful farmers market and food grown and honey that's harvested right there in the meadow, and it's beautiful, pristine lake that you can run around with your kids. No pesticide applied anywhere, so it's just a marvelous place to restore and rejuvenate, and to taste really great foods grown by Sing Meadows and cooked by Lee Sing.
Lovely. We're going to go there together sometime soon. Cristal, how about you? Do you have an idea how people should engage? We know we have to shop, but what beyond shopping?
I was gonna say, I think Melissa's story earlier made a good point about the disconnection between people and local American Indian communities. That there isn't even that concept that maple syrup would have a great importance to the local Native community, and in the past, I would say, you know, go visit the reservation, go see what's happening there, go support their local economy. They likely have a restaurant similar here in Ajo where they have an Indigenous chef and sharing their Indigenous dishes, and they have a cultural center and such. But now in the time of COVID-19, that's not the best idea, as it's worse on the reservations. And, you know, that's part of what we're figuring out in the greater conversation between the tribal nations, is how are we not even more isolated? And so, yeah, I'd say that's, again, a beginning of that conversation for us.
I'm going to stick Suzanne Palmieri with this question too. What's the Sweetie Center going to do? Let me know.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure I'm going to answer for the Sweetie Center, but we can talk about that at some point. But I guess what I'm thinking about, just coming off a federal election, a national election, is that, you know, we have to pay attention to what the policies are that are guiding some of our food system, that, you know, distribution of equity around in the food system and where we are. And I don't think that there has been, I mean, we know that a lot of the programs that are coming out for farmers are not administered equitably and haven't been historically, and that there's folks that are involved that are making a charge. There's a 5-year farm bill that happens that can make some changes, but we need to have sort of citizen involvement in how some of these decisions are made. And I guess my challenge is that we all get better informed, and that we know what's happening, and we know where we can make changes, and that we work together.
Great. All right, I've got a really fascinating question from Joni. She says, I visited a buffalo ranch in New Mexico and learned that buffalo form clans, and that after they were nearly exterminated, they lost their clan systems. So zoologists and scientists didn't know that about them. Now that they are being restored, we know this about buffalo again. This is an example of why studying buffalo will indeed yield indigenous scientific knowledges that are needed by Western scientists. So Joni's wondering if Melissa, Cristal, if you know of other stories like this with different animals or seeds where they're rematriated back into the original lands and among their first knowledge keepers. It's a great question.
Joni, you're so awesome. What a great question. Wow. Well, real quickly, I know that, you know, the Buffalo Treaty that the Blackfoot Nation is really leading, but also working with Lakota and so many different First Nations on both sides of the US-Canadian border and Montana and the Dakotas. They've been restoring large areas of land to bring back the buffalo herds, and they're using an older original kind of heirloom, if you will, breed of buffalo from Alberta that hid out up by Banff, the woods buffalo in the Rocky Mountains. And so they're trying to, again, use that original ancestral buffalo, and they're starting to redistribute those buffalo to many different reservation communities. And that has so much power and significance for bringing back the strength of the people, just as we saw with the Dubray family in the film. So powerful. So that's happening with those breeds of the clans of the ancient buffalo, as you already know about. One other really unique story I got to try and tell quickly because it's so powerful, but the Winnemem Wintu tribe are a tribe along keepers of Mount Shasta in Northern California. They were one of the signatories of the original 1850 treaties that were never ratified. So they have no federal recognition, no reservation land. They've suffered the politics of erasure, and yet they are the spiritual keepers of Mount Shasta and the salmon of the Winnemem River, or the McLeod River. When the Shasta Dam went in the 30s, they knew it was one of the richest sources of coho salmon in all of the area. They're just inland from the Yurok people. So incredible salmon. And they even knew when they were damming it, they were going to destroy this. So they took salmon eggs and they brought them and raised some of them in hatcheries. And then they shipped them to New Zealand to raise the salmon there. So that was in the 30s and 40s. Fast forward to now, 80 years later, the Winnemem Wintu are trying to restore their salmon. They've been trying the whole time, but it took them decades to track down where their genetic ancestral salmon are, and they actually raised funds, traveled to New Zealand, Aotearoa, had ceremonies with local Maori, and re-met their ancestral salmon in a river in the South Island of New Zealand. And they have made a treaty with the Maori clan there, or the Maori Iwi, the tribe there, and they made a spiritual treaty with the salmon, their ancestral salmon in the river, to bring them home and rematriate them. It's very politically complex, but they have a long-term vision of removing Shasta Dam and returning those ancestral salmon back to their river.
Wow. Okay. Thank you. That's really something.
Yeah.
That's a powerful story. Cristal, do you have some thoughts on this question?
Yeah, I'll share a story local to this area. And it's one Jacob Butler likes to share, and so I hope I'm going to share it correctly. Jacob Butler is an O'odham farmer, and he lives on the Salt River Pima Indian community. And he likes to tell the story of how the O'odham people regained the black tepary bean. And so genes are recessive. And so what they noticed in the other tepary beans, that every once in a while, like a black one would show up. So what the farmers started to do is that they would save all the black ones. And then once they had amassed a bulk amount of the black tepary beans, they planted them. And so this next generation, it had a few more black ones that would pop up. And then they just kept resaving the black seeds that would pop up. And so typically with seed saving, it takes 7 generations. And with the 7th one, you stabilize the genes. And so they were able to regain their black tepary bean that had only existed in the elder stories, and that they knew it was part of their culture and their past. And through the seed saving efforts, they were able to restabilize those genes and regain the black tepary bean.
Thank you. That's wonderful.
Wow.
All right.
Great story. Thank you.
Great story. So I know we've had a long night, and some people have studying to do, some people have paper grading to do, and some people just haven't had dinner yet. So I really want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. I really want to thank our panelists, Melissa and Cristal. Thank you so much for your insights. Suzanne, thank you for organizing this, you and Slow Food Phoenix, the Sweetie Center. Brandon and Lauren, thank you so much for helping us organize. Charlotte Strong, too, who's here from the Sweetie Center. Thank you for helping to organize. Thank you to everyone who's been sharing all these wonderful resources in the chat room. What an inspirational evening. I bid you all adieu.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.